French Quarter, New Orleans, a city where history echoes through the streets, families build their legacies, and success is measured in wealth and influence. But on a warm summer night, amid the quiet hum of streetlights and the distant murmur of a restless city, an unmistakable sound shattered the stillness. A single gunshot. A life was ended in an instant, leaving behind a tangled web of deception, betrayal, and a desperate fight for truth. What happens when the pursuit of passion crosses a line? When the bonds of marriage are stretched to their breaking point? When love, once sweet and intoxicating, turns deadly? Jonathan Matthews was a man who had it all: money, power, a beautiful wife, a luxurious home in the city's most prestigious neighborhood. But it wasn't enough. Behind the towering walls of his success, behind the handshakes and business deals, there was another life, a hidden desire, a forbidden romance, a secret that would come at a cost no one was prepared to pay. His wife Linda had spent years by his side, building a life, raising their twin boys, and trusting the man she thought she knew. But trust is fragile, and when it shatters, it cuts deep. Then there was Samantha Reed, young, ambitious, enchanted by the world John had opened up to her, a world of expensive dinners, whispered promises, and the intoxicating thrill of secrecy. But what she didn't realize was that she wasn't just stepping into an affair, she was stepping into a storm. On the night of July 14, 2010, in the parking lot of a luxury hotel, the truth erupted in a way no one expected. Screams pierced the air, glass shattered, and in one final moment of rage, a bullet was fired. What drove a woman to the edge? What led a successful businessman to his final breath? And what secrets were uncovered in the aftermath? This is a story of love turned lethal, a story of trust betrayed and lives destroyed. Stay with us as we unravel the gripping details of this tragic case, because in this tale of passion, deception, and revenge, the truth is far more shocking than anyone ever imagined. New Orleans, a city of contrasts, where history and modern ambition collide, where wealth is flaunted and secrets are buried deep beneath the surface. The French Quarter, with its vibrant jazz clubs and grand mansions, is a place where people come to reinvent themselves. But behind the elegant facades and the glow of antique street lamps, one family was about to be torn apart in ways no one saw coming. At the center of it all was Jonathan Matthews. To the world, he was a man of success, a self-made real estate mogul with an empire worth millions. People respected him, envied him, wanted to be him. He exuded confidence, the kind that turned heads when he walked into a room. He wasn't just rich, he was powerful, and power, as we all know, can be intoxicating. At 45 years old, John had built a life that most men could only dream of: a stunning waterfront home, high-end cars, lavish vacations, and an office in one of the most prestigious towers in New Orleans. He was a man who had mastered the art of control. Every deal, every handshake, every move he made was calculated. And yet, there was one thing he couldn't control. Her name was Samantha Reed. Young, ambitious, and fiercely driven, Sam had landed a job at John's company as a secretary. But she wasn't just any secretary. She was sharp, quick-witted, and carried herself with a confidence that made people notice. She wasn't the kind of woman who faded into the background. And John, he noticed. At 28, Samantha had dreams of her own. She had spent years working her way up, determined to escape the struggles of her past. She wanted success, stability, and maybe, just maybe, someone who could give her the kind of life she had always imagined. She was ambitious, but she wasn't reckless. Not at first. But the thing about ambition, it can blind you. And Samantha had no idea that stepping into John Matthews' world would mean stepping onto a path she could never turn back from. Then, there was Linda Matthews. The wife. The mother. The woman who had spent 18 years building a life with John. A respected dentist with a thriving practice, Linda was the kind of woman people admired. She was intelligent, poised, and deeply devoted to her family. To outsiders, her life looked perfect. A loving husband, beautiful twin sons, a home that was the envy of the neighborhood. But perfection is an illusion. What Linda didn't know, what she couldn't see, was that the very foundation of her marriage was cracking beneath her feet. That the man she had built a life with had a secret that would soon become impossible to ignore. The French Quarter of New Orleans is a place of legends, grand historic mansions, dimly lit alleyways, and a rhythm that never stops. It's a city that thrives on mystery, where wealth and excess collide in a symphony of indulgence. The Matthews home was a masterpiece of Southern luxury, a sprawling estate with towering iron gates, a pristine garden, and a wraparound porch where Linda would sip coffee in the mornings, unaware of how quickly her world was unraveling. Inside, crystal chandeliers sparkled under the soft glow of candlelight, expensive artwork lined the walls, and every detail spoke of a life carefully curated. But no amount of wealth could shield them from what was coming. Just a few blocks away, in the heart of the city, was John's office, a sleek, glass-paneled building that overlooked the Mississippi River. It was there, in the hushed corners of that office, that stolen glances turned into whispered conversations, where professional boundaries blurred, where temptation became impossible to resist. It started with late nights, just one more meeting. Just one more drink. A harmless dinner, a lingering touch, and before either of them knew it, lines had been crossed, and what began as an affair in the shadows would soon explode into a scandal that no one could ignore, because in the French Quarter, secrets don't stay buried for long, and when they rise to the surface, they bring destruction with them. But what was it that pushed everything over the edge? What turned a private affair into a public nightmare? What led to that fateful night when everything, love, betrayal, and rage, came to a violent and irreversible end? The answer is only just beginning. It was a warm July evening in New Orleans. The air was thick with humidity, the streets alive with the distant sounds of jazz, laughter, and the clinking of glasses from open-air bars. For most, it was just another summer night in the city. Ordinary, unremarkable. But for Linda Matthews, this night was anything but ordinary. She had spent weeks suspecting, weeks questioning, weeks felt the cold distance between her and her husband grow wider and wider. At first, she ignored it. John was busy, that's what she told herself. He had always been a man who worked late. Business meetings, dinners with investors, trips that took him away for days at a time. But something was different. His phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always face down. His scent had changed, subtle at first but unmistakable. A perfume that wasn't hers lingered on his clothes. And then, there were the calls he wouldn't answer when she was in the room. The hushed conversations in his office. The way he seemed present, yet a million miles away. Something wasn't right. And then the call came. A blocked number. A voice she didn't recognize. 4 words that sent a shockwave through her entire body. English at the Royalton Hotel, a sleek, high-exon escape just outside the French Quarter, a place for out-of-town executives, lavish cocktail parties, and discreet affairs. Linda's hands shook as she ended the call. Her mind raced. She had 2 choices. Ignore it, pretend she never heard it, go to bed, and hope it was all a cruel joke, or she could find out the truth. She grabbed her keys. Her heart pounded as she sped through the quiet streets, headlights cutting through the darkness. The city blurred past her, but all she could see was John's face, his smile. The Royalton's parking lot was half empty. Valets lingered by the entrance, laughing, unaware that just feet away, a storm was about to break. Linda pulled into a spot, turned off the engine, and sat in silence for a moment. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. And then she reached into her bag. The manila folder felt heavy in her hands. A private investigator's report. Photographs, timestamps, receipts. All of it confirmed what she had tried so hard to deny. And just as she opened it, just as she let her eyes fall on the incriminating images inside, the hotel doors swung open. And there he was. John Matthews stepped out into the humid night, buttoning his shirt cuffs, and beside him, Samantha Reed. Linda's breath caught in her throat. Samantha's laughter rang through the air, carefree, light. Oblivious to the woman now watching them from the shadows, Linda stepped out of the car. The heels of her shoes clicked against the pavement, each step gaining speed, gaining force, until she was just feet away. "John!" Her voice was steady, but only barely. He froze. Samantha turned. For a split second no one moved. The silence between them stretched impossibly thin. Then, "Linda?" John's voice cracked, his face shifting from shock to something unreadable. He took a step forward, but she raised a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Don't. Just don't." Her voice was razor-sharp, and in her other hand she held the folder. She let it fall open, letting the damning evidence spill onto the pavement. Samantha's eyes darted down, her face paling as she recognized the photos. Pictures of her, of John, together in restaurants, entering hotels, all time-stamped, all undeniable. "What the hell is this?" Samantha's voice was small now, barely above a whisper. "What do you think it is?" Linda's gaze never left John's. He swallowed hard. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. The deception, the secrets, the months of lies, laid bare in an instant. "Linda, let's just—" John started, but Linda's laugh cut through him like a knife. "That's just what, John," she snapped. "Let's just talk. Let's just explain." "Explain what? That I've been a fool? That you've been sneaking around like some pathetic coward?" The night seemed to hold its breath. Samantha shifted uneasily. John ran a hand through his hair, frustration flickering across his face. "Linda, lower your voice." His tone was sharp, almost commanding. That was the moment everything changed, because something inside Linda snapped. The betrayal, the humiliation, the years of devotion tossed aside for a younger woman. The lies. The endless, soul-crushing lies. The folder slipped from her fingers. "Lower my voice," she repeated, stepping closer. "Lower my voice," her fists clenched at her sides. "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore, John. You lost that right the moment you—" Then it happened. The flash of movement, the explosion of sound. A gunshot. A single, deafening crack tore through the air, shattering the night. John's body jerked. His eyes went wide, his mouth opening in a silent gasp. Then, his knees buckled, and before either woman could move, before either of them could fully grasp what had just happened, he collapsed. Blood seeped into the pavement beneath him. A deep crimson pool spreads outward, staining the concrete. A nearby car alarm blared to life. The valets shouted, someone screamed, and in the chaos, as the world seemed to slow to a sickening crawl, one question hung heavy in the air. Who pulled the trigger? The answer would change everything. News spread like wildfire. In a city where secrets rarely stayed buried, this was the kind of story that no one could ignore. A wealthy real estate mogul was gunned down in a hotel parking lot. His wife, a respected dentist, was caught in the middle. And the young secretary, whose name was now splashed across headlines, standing just feet away when it happened. By sunrise, the French Quarter was buzzing. People whispered in coffee shops, in law offices, in salons where gossip was as much a part of the experience as the styling itself. The Matthews family had long been admired, wealthy, influential, a picture-perfect success story. But now, that image had shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. How could this happen? That was the question on everyone's lips. How did a real estate tycoon, one of the most powerful men in the city, end up bleeding out in a parking lot? And more importantly, who pulled the trigger? The police weren't wasting any time. By 6 a.m., officers had cordoned off the scene, red and blue lights bouncing off the polished glass of the Royalton Hotel. The parking lot, usually filled with luxury cars and well-dressed guests, was now a crime scene. And somewhere amid the chaos, Linda Matthews sat in stunned silence. Body cameras captured it all. Officers approaching Linda, her hands trembling, her face pale. "Mrs. Matthews, we need you to come with us." She didn't resist, didn't say a word. She simply nodded and stood, her expensive blouse stained with John's blood. Inside the hotel, Samantha Reed was being questioned separately. Her mascara had smudged, her dress wrinkled from the night's events. But her voice was steady. "It wasn't me." The detectives weren't taking any chances. They needed evidence. And they found plenty. High above the parking lot, a single security camera had captured the entire scene. A grainy black and white recording showed Linda's car pulling in, her stepping out, and her confrontation with John and Samantha. The heated argument, the moment things escalated. Then, the shot. But the footage was inconclusive. It showed the flash, the instant John's body collapsed, but it didn't show who held the gun. A valet, a couple waiting for their car, a businessman stepping outside for a smoke, they all saw different fragments of the same horrifying moment. She was shouting at him, waving something in her hand. The younger woman stepped back. She looked terrified. Then there was a loud bang. He just dropped. On the pavement, a small silver handgun. The weapon was unregistered, no serial number, clean. Whoever brought it to the scene had made sure it couldn't be traced. And then came the bombshell. Linda's fingerprints weren't on the gun, but Samantha's were. The tension shifted in an instant. Suddenly, the secretary who had played the role of a bystander was at the center of the storm. "Reed, we need to ask you a few more questions." Across the city, televisions flickered with breaking news alerts. Radio hosts debated the case in real time. Social media erupted, and behind the walls of the police station, one truth became painfully clear. Someone was lying, and the real story was far from over. Just when the case seemed straightforward, when the narrative of a scorned wife, a secret affair, and a deadly confrontation seemed to fit neatly into place, everything changed. Investigators had been piecing together John Matthews's final months, retracing his steps, combing through bank statements, phone records, and emails. And what they found flipped the entire case on its head. John and Samantha weren't just having an affair. They were planning an escape. It had started as a secret rendezvous in quiet hotel rooms, hushed phone calls and text messages sent late into the night. But by the time John took his last breath, it had evolved into something much more. Something with real consequences. Through interviews with close friends and business associates, detectives uncovered a bombshell. John had been liquidating assets, selling off properties, moving money into offshore accounts. The timing was suspicious. 1 week before his death, John had transferred $250,000 to an unknown account. The account was linked to a financial institution in Belize, a well-known destination for those looking to disappear. The recipient? Samantha Reed. This wasn't just an affair. This was an escape plan. Samantha had told friends that John had promised her a new life, a future far away from the expectations of his marriage, his business, his entire identity. "He told me we would be in Mexico by the end of the month." That was what Samantha confessed in a recorded police interview. She claimed John had grown desperate, that he was terrified Linda would take everything from him, his fortune, his children, his reputation. He wanted out. He was willing to do anything to make it happen. But there was one glaring problem. Linda Matthews had known about the affair, and not just recently. 6 months before John's murder, Linda had hired a private investigator. She had suspected the affair for nearly a year. The late-night phone calls, the sudden weekend business trips, the cologne she didn't recognize. Something didn't add up. When the investigator delivered his findings, it was worse than she imagined. Pictures, hotel receipts, an entire second life John had built behind her back. That's when Linda's behavior started to change. Her colleagues at the dental office recalled how she started showing up late, distracted. Some days she wouldn't come in at all. Her once polished appearance became disheveled. She lost weight. She stopped talking about John altogether. She wasn't herself anymore, one coworker later told detectives. She just shut down. But it wasn't just her coworkers who noticed. John's friends saw it too. He had confided in them that Linda had stopped arguing with him, stopped fighting, stopped caring, and that terrified him. "She told me she wasn't mad," John had said to a friend in a text message. She said she understood. That's what scares me the most. It was an unsettling shift, a woman who had been wronged, betrayed, humiliated, and yet she barely reacted. He was up to something. That's what John believed, and it was a fear that lingered right up until the night he was shot. But then came the most stunning revelation of all. Linda Matthews had an airtight alibi. When forensic investigators combed through the surveillance footage, the evidence, the crime scene, one detail stood out. The gun that killed John wasn't just unregistered. It had never been fired before. It was brand new. And the person who had purchased it? Samantha Reed. She had bought the gun just 3 weeks before John's death. Suddenly, everything shifted. Was Samantha the devoted mistress, or something much more dangerous? And if she was guilty, had Linda been playing along the whole time? Someone had planned this. Someone had set John up. But who? And why? The answers were about to shake the entire investigation to its core. After months of investigations, endless speculation, and a courtroom packed with reporters, the moment of truth had arrived. The fate of Linda Matthews was now in the hands of 12 jurors. A woman once known for her gentle bedside manner and her dedication to family, now stood accused of taking the life of her husband. The courtroom was silent as the jury's decision. We, the jury, find the defendant, Linda Matthews. A pause. The air was thick with tension. Guilty of manslaughter. A collective gasp filled the room. Some had expected a harsher charge, second-degree murder, perhaps even premeditated murder. Others believed she would walk free, that the justice system would show mercy to a woman who had been deceived and humiliated. But in the eyes of the law, Linda had acted in the heat of the moment, a crime of passion fueled by betrayal. 3 weeks later, Linda Matthews returned to court for sentencing. The prosecution painted her as a woman who had let anger cloud her judgment, who had chosen violence over justice. The defense argued she had been pushed to the edge, abandoned by the man she had devoted her life to. The judge took a deep breath before delivering the sentence. Linda Matthews, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in state prison. The gavel slammed. Linda barely reacted. No tears, no outbursts, just silence. As officers escorted her out of the courtroom, reporters shouted questions. Do you regret it? Did you plan this? Was it worth it? She didn't answer. But even as Linda Matthews was led away in handcuffs, even as the case was officially closed, something still didn't feel right. Samantha Reed, the woman at the center of it all, was nowhere to be found. The moment Linda was arrested, Samantha vanished. She skipped town, abandoned her apartment, and deleted her social media. Authorities searched, but she was gone. And then there was John. Why had he liquidated his assets just days before his death? Why had he sent money to an offshore account in Samantha's name? Was he truly planning to leave, or was there something else at play? The case had an ending, but did it have closure? One life was lost, another was locked behind bars, and the woman who may have held all the answers, she had disappeared without a trace. The truth may never fully come to light, but one thing is certain. That night in the parking lot, someone knew exactly what they were doing. One decision, one confrontation, one moment that changed everything. John Matthews was a man who seemed to have it all. Wealth, a thriving career, a family that the world saw as picture perfect. But beneath that carefully maintained image lay a story of deception, heartbreak, and betrayal that ended in a single gunshot. Was it a crime of passion, a moment of unbearable grief turned into irreversible violence? Or was there more to this story than we will ever truly know? Linda Matthews now sits in a prison cell, living with the weight of what happened that night. But did she ever truly have a choice? Some argue she was a woman pushed to the edge, betrayed by the very person who had vowed to love her. Others believe that no amount of heartbreak could ever justify the decision she made. And then there's Samantha Reed, the woman whose presence in John's life may have been the match that ignited this fire, but who disappeared without a trace, the moment the flames became too much. Where's she now? Why did she run? And what did she know that we don't? The case is closed, the verdict has been given, but the question, they remain. What do you think? Was justice truly served, or does this case leave too many unanswered questions? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Could this tragedy have been prevented? What would you have done if you were in Linda's position? If you found this story compelling, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more true crime documentaries that uncover the shocking realities behind seemingly ordinary lives. Stay vigilant, cherish honesty, and join us next time as we unravel another story that will make you question everything you thought you knew.